For those of you who don't know me, I'm Gabby Gosman. I'm the residency program director for OBGYN. And I am the only Gosman in the email list. So if you guys have questions or you want to have a further conversation on this, feel free to look me up. I also have a role in GME at the institution as the associate DIO, the associate doctor in charge for all residencies and fellowships, and procedure assessment has been my passion for a long time in being in the field. And so what I am hoping to accomplish today is to master presenter view, first of all. To basically use my residency, running my residency as a lens through which to view this huge topic. And so it's going to obviously be, I can't cover everything in an hour, but I'm hoping to walk you through what we've done in our residency. And so I'm hoping that you'll walk out of here with a better understanding of the developmental progression of technical skills and then what that means for curriculum and assessment. I'm going to expose you to a bunch of tools and characteristics of the assessment tools that are out there so that if, for many of us who run residencies or deal with GME, we're going to have to be messing with our assessment programs. So if you're thinking about messing with your direct observations, I'm hoping to make you a more savvy consumer. I'm hoping to tell you a cautionary tale about my crappy management of data so that you will be more planful. Should you be responsible for those things? And so our goals of assessment, I think, are super important when we're talking about procedure assessment because your question and the context that you're asking your question for the tool really, really matters in terms of choosing the tool and choosing the compromises you're going to make because no tool is perfect. And so we would obviously love to have formative feedback. In an era when procedures, for most of us, we have some procedures that are on the bubble, getting fewer and fewer. Really, as educators, we're trying to get people up that learning curve as effectively as possible, and obviously formative feedback is a huge part of that. And then, at least as a program director, as somebody who's in charge of an education program, you want to be able to answer some really key questions, which is, primarily, what kind of supervision does this trainee need? From soup to nuts, from like totally overbearing to ready to graduate and everywhere along the line. That's basically our question that we're asking of these direct observation tools for technical skills. And so what I am hoping you can learn from me are parts of things that you could learn from me. I have Miller's Triangle in my purse or something else in the way. But for the procedural specialties or specialties that have a fair amount of procedural work, direct observation is what we do all the time. We're forced into that by the Medicare billing rules, which happened to me at the beginning of my residency. And so for us, we're trying to capture, we already have the attending in the room, we're trying to capture what that attending thinks. And then I'm hoping to share what we've done in our program, a few of the elements for both formative and then predictive assessment. So I'm hoping to just fill in this table with you guys, or since I'm using presenter view, I probably can't do that, but to mentally fill in this table, I put up there a procedure in OBGYN that's on the bubble for me, that I'm worried about my trainees finishing and being competent to do. So I put up forceps. About half of my it is a requirement, half of my grads will end up doing it in practice. The level that I achieved, the lowest common denominator for my graduating residents, between you and me, actually I'm being recorded, but is barely competent. The level that my very goal-directed learners, the ones who know they're going to go use this in practice, is proficient for an uncomplicated context. Is the volume enough? Absolutely not. Am I worried? I'm worried now, and I'm really worried for the future. Does some of you guys mind just volunteering just walk me through a table for procedures that are in your field along these lines? Okay.
Probably three-quarters of our grads would do it ultimately. Level of mastery would be, I would say fairly competent. Pinnacle of mastery should be the same, proficient for uncomplicated, but not necessarily able to do all of the troubleshooting. Although I guess, well, that's
Your best grad? Could your best grad troubleshoot?
my best grad can troubleshoot.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So that should be proficient for even tricky, complicated
Okay.
placements. The volume is not nearly enough. Am I worried? The PA catheters are being phased out for a lot of patients in the ICU, but they're still necessary for some patients. So I guess I'm maybe not a full yes, so I'm absolutely worried, but
Sort of.
yeah, sort of.
Give me a sort of. Okay. One other procedure you guys would volunteer? Central lines for internal medicine?
Probably more paracentesis, actually.
Paracentesis.
That's the one that we do most.
And would all your graduates go out and do it?
No. Greg, do you want to, I'm going to let you answer this question because you're in charge of our paracentesis. So I threw you in.
I think realistically, for an average internal medicine graduate in their career, 2% of people are going to do this.
Okay.
It's a small, very small fraction.
And it's a requirement? Is it a requirement? Okay. Okay.
The level of mastery, there's a lot of discourse in our own internal medicine division about whether people should be able to do this or not. So I would go with probably the lowest common denominator. I would say they're fairly competent.
Okay.
The pinnacle of mastery, I think, for those people that are going to be hospitalistic.
And you guys could get people to that stage within your residency, people graduate that high? Okay. Enough volume?
I think we have enough volume.
Okay.
Am I worried that we have the ability to get people to that high level of mastery? No, I'm not. I think a lot of it depends upon the trainee and their desire to get to that level. I think that's one of the things that I struggle with is that sometimes some people say, I really want to get good at this, and it seems to me like everybody says they want to get really good at it, but most people don't really.
They don't act that way. Or they don't need to and they don't act that way, maybe. Okay. It's interesting because in OBGYN, by the end of training, I can tell where their career is headed with almost double the numbers of sort of the lowest common denominator in the field that they're going into. And, just kind of hitting now we have minimums for our accreditation and hitting the minimums for the other stuff, basically. So they're clearly making a decision. And it's amazing what you can get when you want it, but not for my lowest common denominator. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. So I want to walk you through transitions that we made in our procedure assessment program. Before 2008, we had case logging through the ACGME. Residents enter their volume in particular categories. We used the end of rotation evaluations that were global with the 6 core competencies. We added surgical skills as a 7th and was on the typical 1 to 9 scale. So, average resident got a 7 as per everyone. We used simulation a lot to teach and practice, but we didn't tap into assessment at all in training exam. And then when I first took the job, I did a pilot of direct observation for every laparoscopic case done. It was a core faculty group of me and 3 other faculty members. We used one of the tools I'm going to show you, and we put in the responsibility of the faculty to complete the cards on each of the trainees that they did. So we ended up learning a fair amount about it. What I ended up choosing for my direct observation tool was not the original tool that I used for the pilot. I definitely learned my first lesson about compliance. That was tricky to get people to do it. But I was naive and young. So the catalyst for me to change my assessment program was really not very glamorous at all. The program information form, which is that verbal description you give of your residency training program for ACGME when they come in for an external site visit, or for UPMC when they come in for an internal site visit, the question changed. And it changed from describe the educational exposure in about 20 areas to how do you ensure program graduates are competent in about 10 of those areas. And so that was sort of a sea change of what they were asking for. And I knew that I probably should be doing that but this sort of drove me to really change. I think we're on the cusp of another huge catalyst with the milestones, forcing programs again to take a hard look at how they assess, and a lot more direct observation going to have to be required in programs across the board in order to be able to answer, can my trainee do X? So I'm going to back off of my program for a second and show you this developmental framework, which is probably not particularly visible at the back of the room. I apologize. And it goes from novice on the left to expert on the right, kind of the same way that the milestones do. And I glommed together two frameworks and added the arrows. So it's not, the references sort of each have their own approach, and I sort of glommed them together. And it goes from needing the knowledge of anatomy, safety, instruments, blah, 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 to doing stuff with your hands while your brain is very, very engaged. We'll call that the associative stage. So a lot of concentration, a lot of brain power to get through the hand motions that you're doing. At some point, those hand motions become autonomous, and there's much less brain power going into driving your hands. And here's where I glommed on the extra stuff. As soon as you get into strategy planning, weird anatomy, troubleshooting, you will see even for an expert, their brain gets engaged again. They might stop and think and get back to the cognitive. They might slow down. The way even in an office session, you're blowing through your patients, and then you hit that one patient. And when you're an expert, you know, I got to slow down. Here, I'm going to make a mistake. Everybody else can wait. And that could throw you back into these two other earlier stages. And then creativity, sort of at the ultimate end, making a new surgery, inventing transplant, you know, taking bariatric surgery from laparotomy to laparoscopy. Same thing, back to the drawing board, thinking about it, thinking about your instrumentation. And then as you're doing those early ones, your brain is really firing. So even an absolute expert is using a lot of brain power during portions of those cases. The other thing I'm going to throw into the strategy planning end is the soft skills, the non-technical skills, to be a team leader, to deal with crisis, to communicate with your anesthesia, to do anticipatory planning. I know I'm going to need a frozen section, so I'm going to be getting pathology up into that room so I don't waste a half an hour of anesthesia time. That is up in that strategy planning. That is very, very difficult, and if we have time, we'll get to that. And so remember, this is similar developmental progression as with sort of any skill, but you're asking somebody, this is about doing stuff with your hands plus. And that's what makes it a little bit special. I introduced a little bit the concept of workload, which really, when the brain power fires at that associative stage, at that second stage, you get more frustrated, you can't pay attention, your creativity is limited, you can't really look up and around, you can't guide your anesthesia team, you can't problem solve as well. And so your workload gets very high at this associative stage. This is a vulnerable time for the patient. So if you have a procedure where the stakes are high enough or your attending cannot protect that patient from harm enough, you do not want your trainees going through this associative stage. You want to mitigate that risk somehow with either simulation practice or more of a hover mother type supervision, because that is a very dangerous time for the patient. And so the basic progression of the curriculum really follows that. So you have to learn some stuff for those procedures where the stakes are high or the attending cannot protect that patient from harm. You would use simulation, plus you have to obviously have good models. Moving on to live procedure performance, and then really working hard on the non-technical skills, the communication, the team leadership, blah, 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 and recognizing that that's a much, much harder thing, and you cannot throw that in earlier in the mix to a serious degree because you're just blowing the whole developmental framework. So back to our program. We really revamped the assessment program to try to answer those questions, and I'm going to focus on the top two that I circled, but I'll run you through what we did, and if you guys have any questions about it, I'd be happy to answer them anytime. We're going to talk about fundamentals of laparoscopic surgery, national certification, and we're going to talk about assessment of case-by-case surgical performance. We revamped our end of rotation evaluations to include level-specific procedural skills for every rotation. And these evaluations are done on our team-based rotations. Faculty do them as a group. So before there were entrustable professional activities, that's kind of what they are. So an intern can do vaginal delivery, can do a repair, can evaluate people for labor, and then, you know, my third year, my fourth year are being rated on different things as their end of rotation evaluation. For some of my procedures on the bubble or for emerging procedures, we had asked experts within the faculty to do a summative sign-off, like I sign off that Joe can do a laparoscopic hyst, because I just didn't want to take full responsibility necessarily for that. I kind of wanted to have like belt and suspenders, multiple evaluations saying that my trainees could do this. We instituted oral exams in OB and GYN. In some years, this is a couple times per year, and many of these deal with judgment during procedures, judgment leading up to procedures, things like that. So get to the thinking aspects that you might not see as an attending just watching a resident doing a case.
So this is not the national oral exam. This is you guys just doing it.
In the program, yeah.
And do you do it as a chart stimulated recall, or do you just give them questions to think about?
They're standardized. Now they're standardized, sort of, exactly, with kind of a loose checklist for what you have to hit, and the topics have been chosen level appropriate. Or in GYN, the topics are all the same, but the level of mastery is level appropriate.
You do it 4 years?
We do it all 4 years. Some years they get a couple of each, and so I hope to beat the fear out of them, of the oral exams. We still have an oral as part of our board certification, because I was terrified. I'd never taken an oral before, so it's sort of
Your gift to your
my gift to my residents. You know, and they study for the
and
test.
I'm sure they see it that way.
Yeah. I tell them. I have to tell them that story every single time. So I'm going to start with introducing the concept of assessment into our simulation program. And my goal was very grandiose, and I'll show you how I didn't meet that goal at all. I was pretty naive. I was going to try to provide evidence that my residents were capable of laparoscopic surgery or not. And then I had 2 sub-goals. I wanted to motivate them, you know, to train for the test. And then I wanted to make their learning and practice more efficient, not over-practice and not under-practice. And in this particular exercise, it's been shown that this approach can make that practice on the simulator very efficient and have more durability. So I enrolled them in this national program. It's Fundamentals of Laparoscopic Surgery Certification. It's required in Gen Surg residency since the mid-2000s. It's actually required for Gen Surg board certification since 2009. And I think that's where I got the grandiose idea that like this was going to answer my big question, because it was required for board certification. So look no further. And it is objective, fair, and validated. There's a cognitive exam, and then there's a skills exam on a standard simulator. They send a proctor to your residency, and they do 5 skills drills. They're rated on time to complete the drill and errors. During our first year, they did residents did the curriculum during their third year, which is the big surgery year. And then just as they became fourth years, they took the test. The second year, as it became clear that that type of surgery was really the wave of the future and replacing all of the big open incisions, we moved the whole thing a year earlier. And they took the test right as they turned into R3s. So here's where it burst my bubble. It turns out that both my levels of resident, who are developmentally so different, you guys watching a video could totally tell the difference between these two. You don't need a validated form to do it. Could pass this test with indistinguishable scores. It's not, I think the message for me is not a challenge for an advanced resident, primarily because it doesn't need a lot of judgment. It just gets you into that, like, testing the autonomous phase, but not into pushing one farther developmental level, basically. And so I wanted to justify the cost, because I knew this was a good thing in my heart, but I had to think about it and justify it. And actually, the way that I frame it is that we'll do it in the second year as a prep for the advanced laparoscopic surgery they're going to do as a third year. During those surgeries, a lot of times they're very needed, which is a scary concept, but the attending there really needs their expertise. And so this curriculum does ensure that their brain can make their hands do what it's telling them to do, and really preps them to eliminate that associative, very dangerous associative phase in these higher stakes surgeries that they do as third years. And it's not a crazy cost, and so I think the patient safety justifies the cost. But it certainly wasn't as all-encompassing as I was hoping. So I think that assessment gets at the cognitive aspects of laparoscopic surgery and then really tests the autonomous phase of pure dexterity without judgment. The other thing that we did was to assess case by case, introduce an assessment of case by case surgical performance. And this was building on what I had piloted when I first took the job. And we always have an attending in the room, and I think for medicine and the cognitive fields, the challenge goes beyond that, because we already have attendings spending the time. We just don't capture the data. Now, they're surgeons, so capturing the data actually is more of a challenge than you would think, but we're not going to have to pay people to sit in the room, because that's what they're getting paid to do. And so I'm trying to capture this really precious data, because without capturing it, I realized my residents have sort of radio silence about their technical skills. And I'm not going to go into the blow-by-blow of the process of getting this done, but I'll talk a little bit about it. It took a lot of work with my procedural divisions to kind of compromise on the tool and the process and how it fit into the workflow, to negotiate capturing those observations and to negotiate having surgeons take a little bit of time to rate the trainees with each case. And our tool is absolutely a compromise, but it's not as important for you guys. I think what's important for you is to show you what's out there for the direct observation tools, so that if you need to use these in your programs, you'll be a savvy consumer, or if you're going to adapt them.
I think what you just said is part of the stress, right? I can get better data with a better form, but no one will fill my form out.
It's such a compromise.
So
Yeah.
there's always that tension between getting it filled out and the quality of the data.
It's totally true. It is totally true. And I have some good references for that too, if people want them. They'll be in the slides. So the procedural observation tools, I sort of categorized what's on the tools into the following categories, which appear at the header of the columns. So some of these tools have procedure-specific items. Some are checklisty, task completed, yes, no. Some are tasks with descriptive anchors, so very rich. Some are procedure-specific errors. Some of them have global elements, either technical skills, behaviors, errors that are global, non-technical skills, behaviors, the communication, teamwork, blah, 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 need for supervision. Usually some kind of summary that either summarizes the behaviors observed or summarizes need for supervision in a single rating. Some of them have a summary for the context, degree of difficulty, which I really like. And then most of them have room for narrative, either unstructured or like did well, needs improvement, something like that to guide the narrative. And I'm going to show you a few high-profile examples and sort of explain them. This is sort of the Mac Daddy of this for surgical procedures. This is the global OSAT's global rating scale. That's objective structured assessment of technical skills. This is what I used in my pilot. It has observations in the first column in 7 areas, scored with anchors on a 5-point scale. Super interesting, though, if you take time to look at this, knowing that your raters are going to have a halo effect, or they're just going to go down a column. 5, thinking about development, is very different stage for many of these behaviors, and so it would not be proper to go all 5s unless you really were dealing with somebody who is fabulous. And I don't know that my raters weren't paying attention. When I was interpreting this data, I just didn't need this much. This was too much. Too busy for me, but it was sort of the classic. It was the one that was out at the time, and so I went with it. Many, many groups have adapted elements of this in the evolutions of their technical skills. Like they've taken a piece of it, and I'll show you that. But this is kind of the classic. This is a beginner skills assessment, and it's used to decide ready for live surgery, yes, no, kind of in a boot camp approach for the 5 or 6 basic technical skills you need as a surgeon. And so it's procedure specific for those 5 or 6 skills. I'm showing you one. It has, where'd I go? Checklisty, skill performed, behavior performed, yes, no on the top. Then one of the global rating scale OSATs thingies borrowed, economy of time and motion with anchors. And then a final rating that literally just asks the question that they want answered. Is this guy ready for live surgery, or do they need more practice? And I think it's very well suited for its intended use, but it's a limited use. This would be useless for somebody who's more advanced. But maybe for central line, or in the medical school, placing an IV, things like that for beginners to be let loose on humanity. To do stuff. So I like that one for its use. This is a global rating scale that is procedure specific for laparoscopic chole, and it has some really, really cool features. It takes, in the first column, specific steps of the procedure, and then the rating scale has anchors for how that should be done. What's super awesome about this is it's fabulous formative feedback. And it actually is stealth faculty development for your raters. What is insane about this is the process it takes to develop this. You had to get experts to agree on how to do a lap chole, and then all the anchors. And I just can't even imagine how awful that would be. This is a very, very common procedure, obviously, for gen surg, but it's not their only one. So that I would just throw that out immediately. So cool, but unattainable, I think, with the resources that I personally would have. It has to be updated, too. If you have a procedure that changes or evolves, or the literature changes, you have to update it, and at your peril if you do not. So we all know we leave our assessment forms alone until maybe 2 years after they should have been changed. And for something like this, that would not be cool. But for formative stuff, it's pretty amazing. This is the Global Operative Assessment of Laparoscopic Skills, the goals, also sort of a classic for laparoscopic surgery. They took the first 4 rows are adapted from the first tool I showed you and made specific to laparoscopic surgery, not just all surgery. And then they have an autonomy supervision item with anchors, which I really like because that's primarily my question. And then a context question for degree of difficulty, which I also really, really like because it helps you to interpret the information that you're getting back.
Those column ones are pretty scary. So the first one
You depends on the surgery. So if it was a surgery that should be within the context of your training program, like you should be able to go out and do it, they're probably intending you get to a 5 for that surgery. Now, not for a more advanced surgery necessarily, but if that's in the scope of your specialty, you're getting to a 5 on this form. 1, you should not be operating on somebody. You're totally right. You should be in the simulator. And for laparoscopy, there are great simulators, so there's no point in torturing, risking patient care that way. That's a great point. Good for you. So I think this is a good construct for, at least for GME, for fellowship and residency. You would want a supervision item. You would want a context item. Whether or not you need the 4 other things, I don't know. You could decide. This is the O-Score, Ottawa Surgical Competency Operating Room Evaluation. They have a bunch of behaviors there, 1 through 8. And every single behavior is rated on a supervision scale, which for some makes sense, but like visual spatial skills, I don't know if like you could rate supervision. So I like supervision, but I don't know that I like a supervision scale for the entire form. It's long. I like question number 9 because that's essentially my question for my graduates. Resident is able to safely perform this procedure independently. And then done well or need for improvement. So I like supervision as a concept, but I think they kind of went nuts with this one. This is my favorite comprehensive reference on this topic to date. And so it's a great reference if you want to look up a tool or you're thinking about modifying one of the tools for your programs. They included, it's from the UK, so it's the CRAFT specialties, which are typical surgery specialties, cardiovascular diseases. GI, I think, was left out of this, unfortunately, because there's some pretty good tools for GI procedures. And they took technical skills assessment forms that are used for medical student, graduate medical education, and or practicing providers, any articles that had published on that, and did this kind of cool thing. They took 4 kinds of validity and reliability and made a diamond plot for each article. There might be multiple articles that look at the same tool, but you can see for each of the articles, theoretically more blue is better, but we'll talk about everything is kind of a compromise in terms of how you're going to use your tool. So they did these diamond plots. Validation for most of the tools in this review was based on use in residencies and fellowships, and almost all of them used construct validity, defined as the ability to distinguish junior novice trainee from senior trainee, which isn't really my question. And so I don't feel that much better that they're validated or not validated, because anybody could do that, and I don't need like a structured tool to accomplish that. But that's basically what's out there in the literature. And those that looked at it had a very limited ability to distinguish like upper level senior trainees and then senior trainees from practicing providers. So didn't have a lot of, I'm not like a great psychometrics person, didn't have a lot of precision or whatever, if that's the right word. They adapted this table from Kees van der Vleuten, who I really, really like on the topic of assessment in medical education and assessment in general. He's a fabulous reference, and there are a lot of YouTube lectures you can watch if you're interested in this topic, if you just YouTube his name. This is a classic reference at the bottom from him. And he has 2 major points that I want to make with this slide. One of them is that for all of these types of validity, reliability, plus acceptability, educational impact, cost effectiveness, you must make a deliberate compromise knowing why you're going to use this tool, what is your question, what is the context. You have to make those compromises intentionally. So most of us are not writing the board exam, you know, for the learners that we're responsible for. And so crazy reliability every single rater is going to use this tool and rate the same way. Not so much of an issue for us. We need to get it done, so feasibility has to be high. So you might compromise on certain things in order to get it done, like Missy said earlier in the talk. That really is a balance, but you need to go in eyes open. The other big point that he makes is that Kees van der Vleuten makes is that reliability is optimized with adequate sampling. And so for many of these tools, you might have your high scores and your low scores. You don't have to have a crazy structured tool that reins them all in. You just need to sample enough. So enough ratings from each person in enough context can actually achieve a level of reliability that allows you to answer your question. Now, if the question is higher stakes, that reliability has to be higher. So that's the other big point from Kees van der Vleuten that I think is important. The reference I included there is a cool one. When the UK started instituting their mandatory direct observations for their various types of specialties, this article shows you how many of those direct observation tools had to come back in to achieve a certain level of reliability in the different programs. So it's a cool reference for that. For what we did with the OBGYN program, I think in our current iteration, we totally ditched validity. I literally just asked the question, is this resident competent, appropriately acquiring competence, needs attention or not observed for the procedure. Well, not observed is not true, but for the procedure that they're doing. And then some room for narrative, things done well, things that need to be improved. So we absolutely trashed validity. Reliability, I'll talk about my data collection problems. Acceptability is very acceptable. It doesn't cost very much at all. Educational impact is pretty amazing. The narrative that I've gotten back on these forms is really awesome from surgeons, so I'm very pleased with it. But my crappy data collection has hindered me in making the best use of that, so I want to give you my cautionary tale next. This I just totally stole from another slide set, and I'm being recorded, which is bad. But this is the Windows to Competence diagram, which is so cool because it has an overlay with little windows showing you that the word behind it is competence. Each of the windows might be repeated sampling of a single tool, so you've obviously gotten enough tools in to know the truth of what lies behind. Or these might be different tools in your assessment program that are allowing you to see the full picture that competence lies behind. You can imagine if you eliminated the middle three, you didn't sample enough, you didn't have the right tools in your program, you might make some guesses at what you were seeing and you could be wrong. So I think that is pretty cool. Now, in order to be able to fully appreciate the data you're bringing in, managing that data is incredibly important, and direct observations, especially if they're adequately sampled, the data is going to pour in. And so making sure you're getting what you asked for, heckling when you're not, making sure that the data that comes in is good data and that it's entered properly and cleaning it appropriately is super important. Having reports that are meaningful and generating them to anybody who would care, so that's whoever's in charge of the education, the raters, the rated, and then ultimately the deciders is incredibly important. None of this I thought through ahead of time, but you should. And I think, in the mid-2000s, we didn't have great ways of data management for GME. I'm thinking that that's moving in a better direction now. And I have a team that's worked with me to ultimately get to a better place than where I started. But data management and thinking this through is incredibly important. Then ultimately, you're going to have a clinical competency committee, which is just about to be required by the ACGME, that are going to be the deciders. Can a trainee do X? Can a trainee be promoted? Can a trainee graduate? And they are going to need a certain kind of report for all of the assessments in your program that allows them to quickly make a decision without just a ton of sifting through the source documents, every single direct observation. So you want to think about reporting out to them is going to look different than what you gave to the trainee, than what you're looking at as the program director. And so that's yet another formatting of the data to make sure that it's useful. Shanta included the concept of the Clinical Competency Committee in her talk earlier in the year. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar with it, it's a group of faculty kind of taking the decision-making out of just the program director's hands and assessing trainees that way. Sometimes these committees have residents on them, maybe yes, maybe no. And so these committee members would be able to discern from the assessment data that a program director is feeding them where a trainee stands. So I think the format has great potential. During the last couple minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about non-technical skills, because this was sort of a wake-up call for me. And I think the message is that to be doing stuff with your hands and to be the team leader and communicate, problem solve, work in a crisis is very, very advanced. And I hadn't really thought about that. This is my daughter. We are at Carey Furnace, and she is filling out a sand mold because some artists are going to pour molten iron from a mini blast furnace and make a tile. She's very absorbed in her work. I would say that this is the associative phase for her. Behind her is the mini blast furnace, which looks like it's about to explode, isn't working properly, and there are all kind of artisans running around trying to make it work. She has no idea what is going on back there because she's all in, she's all about her hands right now. And I think for us and for some of the procedures that are on the bubble for us, we barely get trainees through this stage to automatic, much less to be able to coordinate that whole situation. And if you think about the crisis team training course, in OB we have an OB version of it. It's structured almost exactly the same. What does the leader do? They stand out of the fray. They don't do anything. They think, they take in data, they guide, they lead, but they're not doing this. I mean, that's really, really hard. And I think how I was deceived is when the ACGME introduced the 6 core competencies, I thought you'd just throw up in your curriculum and just get it all in there all at once. And it's so not true. You cannot be teaching your trainees this stuff and have meaningful learning, durable learning. You can't assess them on that stuff until they're ready to be assessed on it. And that's way up the learning curve, maybe even into practicing providers, depending on what kind of procedure you're talking about. And so I coach one of the sessions for my trainees on the laparoscopic simulator. On one of our rotations, they have coached simulation practice twice a week, and I do one of them. And I've been doing it. That's actually how I got into education in the first place. And it gets a little boring because I've been doing it for a long time. And so when trainees get automatic, they can carry on a conversation with me. So it makes it a lot more interesting. I might do career mentorship. Rarely do I actually talk about content for laparoscopic surgery, shopping, restaurants, whatever. So we have a conversation, and I know that I haven't pushed them to the limit of their skills while they can still converse with me. Because when I get them to the limit, they'll either stop or they'll stop talking. Because they can't do both. So in terms of these non-technical skills, I had a trainee pair in the simulator, a third year and a second year. The third year is very gifted, and I had designed a drill to start to teach her non-technical skills. She had to guide the second year through the procedure using her words, using her behaviors. The drill I had constructed, she could slam dunk, I guarantee you, could do it by herself, no problem. So I put her across the table, and this probably wasn't right. From a second year, was not very skilled. And they really hugely flailed. Not only could she not talk to me, but it didn't go well at all. And so that really hit home for me, the non-technical skills. I probably should have waited to do that until I put her across from somebody who was skilled or somebody acting like they were at that level who could listen to her words and implement and things like that. So I'd absolutely overfaced her with this situation. And it didn't work out well. Yeah, go ahead, Frank. She can do it, but she can't guide someone else to do it because that's a non-technical skill, the words and actions. So she can do it with her hands. She's automatic with her hands, but she's not developmentally at the next stage. She could probably have done it with an easier, with a more talented second year. No, like teaching versus doing. Not teaching, guiding. It's not really teaching, guiding. It wasn't live surgery, although in live surgery that does happen, unfortunately. But no, we were in the simulator, so it didn't matter. I mean, the stakes were low, other than she had a failure, and I felt bad for that. Like, I probably should have given her something she could succeed.
And it was a great educational thing for you because you figured out it was a much higher level skill than you thought.
Yeah.
So it was just a mismatch of the
Right. And I hadn't thought as much about this until getting ready for this. Yeah.
I think what you just demonstrated, that example is really interesting because even the way that we do in internal medicine, we do our procedural skills is that people have to do a certain number, and then once they do that certain number, then they're qualified to teach. Clearly, based on what you just said, is probably like not a good idea, right?
Right.
Just because someone really is good at doing the actual procedure, we really don't do anything to actually make sure that they can teach the procedure to somebody else. And they're oftentimes teaching procedures to people who have very little skill or no skill. You felt bad about
Yeah.
putting her with somebody who didn't have great skills. I mean, we actually have residents who perform 5 central lines go and teach somebody who's never done central lines before without any.
Yeah, which would be hard for you, probably, on occasion,
But I'm just saying that's so interesting because I think that it's really, I mean, at least in internal medicine, and I don't know if it's like that in surgical specialties, but I think that there's just this, that we just take it for granted that if you've done a certain number, okay, you could say, okay, if you've done a certain number, well, maybe you really are competent to do it, but just because you've done a certain number doesn't necessarily mean you can teach.
Yeah. The guiding is hard. It's super hard. It's like, think of those people who have guided you well. I've had surgical supervisors who have used words that literally just made me do the right thing. Like, amazing. And then people who are like, up. No, the other up. No, over there. And you're like, what? It's hard. And that actually, for me, I don't operate anymore because I have all this other stuff to do. But for me, it took through my career to get better at that. And we're like, boom, okay, go ahead. And we do it too. In the middle of the night, these two are operating together under supervision. But
Yeah, but you go a step further to Carla's question, how often do you get the pair then on a simulator to work right? Then they go with the live arena and it doesn't work out so often.
that's interesting. So it would usually work out well, but if the anatomy was challenging or it were more urgent or there was a crisis or the equipment wasn't working right, any of those could throw it off.
Well, the thing that was interesting to me in one of your previous things that I didn't comment on was that thing about competence to do it at the average case and competence to do it in the difficult case where there's a patient with obesity. You often don't know till you get in there.
Mm-mm.
And so that's the challenge. That's a really big challenge.
To match the learner with the right level of pathology, because we have your R1s do central lines or whatever it is, like it's in their learning objectives, they're going to do it, but that doesn't account at all for the patient's anatomy or the stakes are higher because of comorbid whatever, and they're like, well, I should be able to do that. I'm an R1, it's on my objectives right here. So we really struggle with that, for sure. The supervision is extremely skilled, but yeah, it does give a little window into how scary this could be. There are many non-technical skills rating forms, so if you were thinking about using this particular form, the reference is on the left, and another good, like the best review that's out there is on the right, if you're interested in looking at them. They have the behaviors in that left-hand column, or the sort of the categories in the left-hand column, specific behaviors, and then the anchors for the rating scale below. And it's kind of what you would think. But there's some nice, validated things that are out there. I have to acknowledge everybody who has helped me with this assessment program, from all of my admin staff, faculty, residents. Everybody's been incredibly helpful, and it's just a work in progress, I think, for us all the time. And I'll stop and then see what other questions you guys have.